Okay, hello everyone. It's a really pleasure to be here keynoting in a RailsConf. I'm really happy to be here. And I was thinking back when preparing this talk, and I'm proud to be the first Brazilian in this stage. Like, we had many Brazilians in the Ruby community, but the first one. If I went back in time 12 years, thank you. If I went back time 12 years ago, I would not believe I would be here. So thank you for Ruby Center for inviting me and all of you to be here to share this moment with me. My name is Rafael França, and you can find me on Twitter and GitHub as Rafael Franca. I'm naturally from Brazil, more specifically from the state of Sergipe, that little red state, right in the coast, the smallest state of Brazil. A very sunny, warm, a tropical paradise. But now I live in Canada, so you can imagine how different it's been for me, especially in winter. I'm a member of the RailsConf team since 2012, and this team is the one responsible for developing the framework and making the final decisions for it. And since 2014, despite what Jonas showed, I'm the first one contributor of the framework. I think GitHub needs to update the algorithm. It's broken. So I work at Shopify, a commerce platform with the mission to make commerce better to everyone. At Shopify, I'm a principal developer in the Ruby on Rails infrastructure team, a team that I helped to found and where I am responsible for the direction of Ruby on Rails inside the company. You might know this team for a few recent projects we announced, like Widget and many other contributions we do to the Rails framework and the entire ecosystem. I'm here today to share the story of this team, what motivates us to continue investing in the Ruby community. This, of course, is in my perspective. To me, it's a love story, a common love shared by many people, from many places working with the same goal, improve the language and the ecosystem we love and cherish. And why I think my perspective is worth being shared. I usually avoid the spotlight, despite I'm here now. I'm the kind of person that likes to do the most boring things so others can focus on the shiny things. I'm always in backstage, make sure that things are in order and everyone has everything they need to do their best. That means that I often have a perspective that most people don't see. I pay attention to details that are often forgotten when looking into success. But are the key reason why those successes happen. Take, for example, my role in RailsConf. You will never see me releasing any revolutionary feature of Rails. In my 11 years, I don't remember a single feature that I worked alone that had been highlighted in the release notes. I see my role in Rails more like an architect, a team leader. I'm responsible for making sure that the framework keeps working, that individual pieces of Rails are talking with each other in the right way, and the interfaces are being respected. I also one of the first interactions that people have when join the Rails issue tracker. I was never the kind of person that was working the big and shiny new feature, but I don't think there is a single feature of the framework that I'm not involved in somehow. The same applies for my role at Shopify. My main focus is to make sure that we are investing in the right things, we create new solutions, and bring new contributors to the community. I consider that we are succeeding in those goals. And by sharing our story, I hope to encourage others to follow our path. My part of this story starts in 2003. I was in university, so like many others, I had to choose what to do in my career when I was 70 years old. My choice was to do computer science, but I did not know anything about it. I only knew I liked computers, and that was pretty much it. My first real experience with programming language was with a language called Pascal, and I really enjoyed it. After the first programming course, I had found a new passion. I spent many hours writing code. I enjoyed doing my assignments so much that I even did to my colleagues, but don't tell this to my professors. I created many graphical interfaces for terminal prompts, and after learning how to make libraries, I made some of those interfaces to be libraries and shared with my colleagues so they could do their assignment easier. At this point, I had no idea what the open source were, but I was already doing it and sharing my code. Fast forward to 2007, I was struggling to graduate. I never finished university. I perceived that all the things that attracted me in programming were not the same things I was learning during my graduation, so I lost all my interest. I decided to find a job in my city, that small state in Brazil. I would only find jobs with Java and PHP at the time, so I ended up getting one in PHP and used the opportunity to apply the new concepts that I was learning in my studies, like TDD and extreme programming, etc. But I had some professors that were inspiring me to search new things, different things. And one of the things they told me to do was to try to do a research project applying some concepts like solid, self-oriented architecture, refactoring tests. Our project was to create web applications in Java, but everything was so hard. A lot of configuration XML files, nothing working together, a lot of choices and acronyms. I had to choose between Hibernate or Java Server Faces, Java Server Pages. I don't even know how those names. So one day, I was trying to find something that was making this easy. So I found a framework called JBossing. And this framework had some generators to generate applications and even CRUD pages. Reading the JBossing documentation, I found out that it was inspired by a framework called Ruby on Rails. When I read about Ruby on Rails, I fell in love with it. I could not believe how easy it was to create web applications. And of course, in the next day, I was back in my company telling people to use that. But of course, without much success. But I did not give up. I started to devote a lot of my free time to learn Rails. When I found a series called RailsConf and started to watch it, for me it was really, really good. At this point, I could read the English very well, but watching videos without subtitles were very hard to me. So RailsConf not only taught me Rails, but also English. In 2008, I was still working with PHP, and most of my contact with Ruby were through like blog posts in the RailsConf. Rails was in the version 2.3, and there was a very vivid community around the framework. During this time, a new web framework in Ruby started to get some traction. This framework was called MERB. Members of both the RailsConf team and the MERB team wrote a series of blog posts explaining why one was better than the other one, and it was full of technical details, and for me that was gold. In the end of 2008, both frameworks announced that they would merge forces together in their effort that would be called Rails 3. Many innovations of the Ruby community happening because of that. Projects like Bundler, Rack, the current architecture of Rails were defined this time, and many blog posts and videos were being released explaining each one of those innovations. It was also the year of the meme, Rails does not scale. And this meme never ends, right? Because of Twitter, which had problems to handle the load during the time of the fast growth of the platform, we had a lot of people blaming Ruby and Rails for those problems. I will not lie that during this time I felt very insecure about continuing to invest in Ruby. After all, I did not spend a lot of time investing in something that people were saying it did not work. But I don't think there was any other language that gave me so much happiness than Ruby at the moment, so I decided to continue studying Ruby and ignore those allegations. In 2010, I had one of my first idols, even José Valentim de RailsConf team. He was a Brazilian, actually he is Brazilian still, he did not change his nationality. And at the time, José was by far the most active contributor for Rails. He was the first line of response of the project. He was merging a lot of pull requests, replying to issues. He was working full-time in the framework. And being able to do that became my goal. That was far from my reality. I was mostly working PHP in a very small place. And Ruby was not even known in my state. So in the day that José became a core member, I set as my personal goal, work with him someday. José also wrote this book. It's called The Crafting Rails Application, a book that explains how to extend the Rails framework to build new features. This book is still, to me, the best book to explain how the architecture of Rails works. And with this new knowledge, I decided to invest some time to learn how to contribute to Rails. I set a very crazy goal. I started to read every single commit to the Rails repository. I'm going to confess that for more than 1 year, I could not understand anything. But I continued to read all the commits. And looking back, I think it was the best decision I ever made. After a while, everything clicked together, and I felt confident to change anything in the framework. Until this day, I still do it, not in the same frequency as before, and I also expanded to read every single commit in the Ruby repository. In 2011, I joined a company called Plataforma Tech, fulfilling my goal to work with José, since he was one of the founders. Plataforma Tech was a consultancy company in the Ruby community that was lately acquired by a Brazilian bank. It was famous in the community because it created some of the projects people still use today, believe it or not, like Device and Simpleform. And we also had 3 RailsConf members at the time. This company was also the birthplace of a language called Elixir. In my consultancy life, I could work in many scenarios, like media, commerce, sports, finance, any other scenarios in different kinds of companies. It was my first opportunity to work full-time in Ruby, and among other things, I could be working with José. My goal was to contribute to Rails, and I thought he could help me with that. Right after joining the company, José started a new programming language called Elixir, and he was not participating much in the company day by day, so I kind of all my goals went sideways because he was not doing Rails anymore. But in 2012, as you saw in the graph, as a New Year resolution, I said that I would contribute to Rails that year. I started the 1st of January, and I felt confident that with my experience in maintaining open source projects like Simpleform, and with all the commits I could read, I would be able to contribute. So I started with the part of the framework I was most comfortable with, Action View, mostly because Simpleform is a form generator that uses Action View. So this is my first PR. I was comfortable with dealing with the safe buffer class in Rails. I started to look in places that were calling HTML safe methods without needing to call it, and deleting it, explaining why it was not needed. And the other way I started to contribute was by looking what others were doing. So one of my friends, Aaron Patterson, was removing support to Ruby 1.8. So I started to do the same thing he was doing. At the time, there was no way to watch a repository at GitHub. So I had to be refreshing the page every time, every 5 minutes, whatever, to see if someone created a new issue or commented a PR. I was doing a little bit of everything in the framework. Fixing broken CI, changing dependencies that got outdated, reply to issues people opened, give feedback, review PRs even though I could not merge anything. I was just giving my opinion. Nobody asked it, but I was giving. And I was mostly mimicking José's behavior. After a week doing that, I built some courage to do bigger things. Hugely inspired by simple form, I refactored the form helpers, extracting every single type on its own class to make it easier to simple form and others to extend them to add new form inputs, and to Rails itself to test and maintain this code. Because of that change, I got invited to participate of the Rails contributor chat that at the time was private. This was still January. Now I started to have a steady stream of ideas to improve the framework because I could read what others were talking about and discussing. My first big feature was adding support to collection radio buttons and collection checkbox, working with my co-worker Carlos, that today is also a RailsConf member. This feature was mostly instruction for simple form that refactor I did earlier made it easier to move to Rails. After a few more months working in the framework, in May 11, 2012, I got commit access. So things got really crazy. All my contributions intensified, not only myself, but contributions from other people because I started to merge PRs from there. I could not merge before. And at the time, most of the core members were either busy with other things or some were retiring, leaving the team completely. So I had a huge backlog of PRs to merge, and I started to work to clean this backlog. I was working even during weekends, and while spending many hours also helping to triage issues, like mark if the issue is important or not. It was during this time that I defined most of the current process to triage issues in Rails, mostly based on my own experience and by observing how José was handling them before. In October of the same year, I joined the RailsConf team, and my commitment only increased. I got many new responsibilities because, like I said, I like to do the boring things. I started to become a mentor organizer of the Google Sum of Code of the Rails org. I became the first interaction of most first-time Rails contributors. I became the release manager, taking over from Aaron. I joined the security team and became its leader, taking over from Cos that was retiring at the time. At this point, I was working closer to 16 hours a day. I was basically with two jobs. My full-time job as a consultant at Platform Tech, and my full-time job as a maintainer of Rails. And of course, as you can figure out, it led me to a burnout. It was a really, really hard time to me. I even thought about quitting programming. I took some months off and handed off most of my responsibilities to other people in the company. But I was still motivated to work in the Rails project. But I decided I could not do that anymore outside of my day job, otherwise I would continue to have the same problems that caused my burnout. So all my Rails contributions decreased. In 2015, with that burnout experience, I started to think about taking my open source career more seriously. I knew I would not be able to continue contribute to Rails, and if I wanted to continue working as a consultant. And I was still curious about the allegation made in 2008 that Rails does not scale. In those 4 years as a consultant, I was able to work in many applications that had performance problems, but usually the solutions were in the application itself, never in the language or in the framework. So I still did not understand the allegation, and I decided to look for opportunities to explore this area and understand better those kind of problems. Looking for answers, I believe that working in application that was trying to push the boundaries of Ruby and Rails was the perfect way to explore this. As a member of the Rails team, I was exposed to pull requests that was changing Rails to solve performance problems, and one application in particular caught my attention. This application was Shopify. I ended up talking with this Rails contributor, scheduled a meeting with his director. They decided to interview me, and during this visit, I decided to join Shopify. Shopify started in 2004, before even the first Rails release. Our CEO, Toby Luckey, was a member of RailsConf. And the time used Rails to build Shopify. That Rails version we received from the HH in a zip file. And he used that to write the application. This application is still the same that many developers today work. Shopify is a huge application with more than 3 million lines of code. Also, the speed of which this application changes is huge. We have 40 versions of Shopify deployed per day, more than 10,000 commits over all the applications we have, more than 1,000 PRs per day, and we have 2,000 developers working at Shopify. My first project was to upgrade that Rails application to Rails 4.1. Shopify never got stuck in any Rails version, but at the time, they were almost 2 versions behind. Since the beginning, I had the very audacious goal of running that application, one of the largest applications in the world, in the development branch of Rails. My goal was to decrease the time to use new features from years that it takes Rails to release to days, without needing to keep a fork of Rails. As secondary goal, I want to use that large code base with a large test suite as a test suite for the framework. This project took me 4 years to complete. During this time, we not only worked to improve the Rails framework, but thousands of applications in the community. We also created a good part of the upgraded process for Rails applications that many consultancy companies are selling as services today. We created concepts like deprecation lists, backward compatible features. We improved the way we do dual booting in the Ruby community. Those are some of the techniques that we made popular. During those first years, the team was most focused on Rails upgrade and were very small. We were only 3 people most of the time, with occasional volunteers to help us to do the Rails upgrades. And although we made several contributions to the framework, most of our time we were focused inwards to Shopify problems. In 2019, looking to increase the scope of influence of my team, I accepted a new mission inside Shopify. The mission was to improve the static analysis in all code bases, and one of the things that was initially being suggested was to use a type system for Ruby. At the time, I was very skeptical about the idea. In my opinion, one of the advantages of Ruby is the freedom, and I thought that types would steal that from us. I did not understand which problem we are trying to solve at all. It looked to me like a solution in search of a problem. I took the mission trying to answer my own questions, and that meant that I would have to change my role inside Shopify to be a manager. I started to look for people to join the team so they could help me with this new area. Because Shopify had a previous relationship with Stripe, we had access to Sorbet even before it was released to the general public, and started to experiment with it. Given my skepticism, I decided to with the team to take a more scientific approach with this adoption. With the 3 new members of the team, we started the adoption of sorbet in our biggest application, trying to verify many hypotheses that we defined. Today, sorbet is used in more than 300 applications inside of Shopify. One of the biggest challenges we had is like Ruby is too dynamic, and Rails was taking too much advantage of this dynamism. Stripe is not a Rails user, and to adopt sorbet, they kind of limited what the language could do. We decided to not take this approach, and we had to find a way to teach sorbet about all the dynamisms of Ruby. And this is how Tapioca was born. The idea was to have a tool that could use introspection and some heuristic to build information about the dynamic parts of Rails and other libraries. The project later became the official RBI generator for sorbet and allow us to use sorbet without limiting how people write Rails application much. The adoption of the main application today is at 98% of files being checked by sorbet. 47% of the method calls are being checked for type errors, and 61% of all the methods have signatures. Every 6 months, we ask people their opinion about the tool. And the number of people that thought sorbet was being useful increased over the time. Sorbet also helped people to identify errors earlier, sometimes errors that even tests could not find. And not errors were being avoided, but also the understanding of the code base were being made easier because of sorbet. Today, I consider the adoption of sorbet at Shopify a success, and cannot wait to see more people at the community trying it out. With the success of sorbet, Shopify started to want to invest heavily in the language itself. But to be fair, I had no idea how to do it. I knew how to contribute to Rails, but even after years reading every single commit in the Ruby implementation, I was not confident I knew how to solve the problems we want to solve alone. Then, one of the VPs of engineering, the VP of our department, decided to use her reach to hire a big name in the community that could help us to build a research team. She reached out to another of my personal idols, Chris Hitton, who was working at Oracle at the time in the Ruby implementation. At the same time, I was invited to go to a meetup in Bristol, organized by Cookpad, to spend a day hacking in Ruby with Matt and other core members. I took the opportunity to fly there with another member of our team, Alan Wu. I asked Matt which kind of help he needed from a company that was interested in contributing more to the language. Matt gave me a very simple answer. I need people. We started work on that investment right in that day. Alan was there, and it was when Alan started his journey contributing to Ruby. Later in that same year, he was accepted to Ruby Core, the first member of our team with commit access to Ruby. Chris Hitton was also in the meeting, and I had an informal interview with him. Something that really caught my attention about him is that I complain a lot, and every single problem I was presenting to him, he always had a solution. With Chris starting our team, I joined him and Alan to try to put Truffle Ruby in production in one of our applications. This application was not in Rails and had very few dependencies, and with a deployment setup made for experimentation, which made the application the perfect candidate. After a few months, we could deploy Truffle Ruby to a part of the traffic of this application. I think perhaps this is the first production application ever deployed with Truffle Ruby. These results were very promising, but not exactly what we want to see. We could see that Truffle Ruby performed better after some warm-up time, but this warm-up period was bigger than the frequency we deployed the application, so we could not keep it running in production. But something we learned is like a big deal of what we can push the boundaries of the language. Therefore, we had a lot of optimizations we could apply to C Ruby, so we could get some performance improvements. And today, we still use Truthful Ruby as a playground to prove ideas on how to optimize Ruby. For then, we transfer back to C Ruby. We are still working with Oracle and other researchers to solve the problems we saw with Truthful Ruby that made it hard to keep running in production, and we hope soon to be able to deploy a Rails application. Around the same time, we started working with Truthful Ruby. Chris were trying to reach out to his connections in the academy to find possible collaborations with Shopify. We ended up convincing Maxime Chevalier-Vauvert to interview with us, and she accepted the offer. Our initial idea was to use Maxime's knowledge on just-time compilers to optimize stuff for Ruby. But she pitched me with the idea of a small JIT compiler for C Ruby using the techniques she developed in her PhD. Also, we recently had brought Aaron Peterson to our team to, how can I explain this? Well, do whatever he wants. After all, he is Aaron Peterson. And while he was working Finish GCC compaction, work that he started at GitHub, and planning what would be his next project, he got excited about the JIT and joined the team. Also, led by Maxime, Aaron, and Alan Wu, started work on this new JIT compiler. The project was called internally MicroJIT, or as I call it, Legit. The goal of this JIT was always to optimize real world workloads. Right? Not fake applications, not fake benchmarks, real world applications. So we used two of our biggest applications to direct what needed to be optimized. Early in the development phase, we reached out to GitHub and invited them to try YJIT in the application. They happily jumped not only to experiment with YJIT, but also to contribute to it. A few months later, we had a working JIT that was proposed to C Ruby, accepted to be included in Ruby 3.1, and now with the name you know, YJIT, and Maxime was invited to be part of the Ruby core. Another avenue of work the team started to work on was trying to do improvements in the Ruby GC. Like I mentioned before, Aaron was finishing GC compaction, and he started to work to think what would be the next phase of the project. But he was working in the YJIT, so instead of pausing all the GC improvements, Aaron mentored two people, Peter and Matt Valentine, to implement variable width allocation in Ruby. The goal of the project was to change the way Ruby allocates objects from objects with fixed width of 40 bytes following pointers to external allocated memory to store the object in line with variable width, avoiding this way the need for the CPU to be chasing pointers to access Ruby objects like hashes and strings. Because of this work, Peter and Matt got invited to Ruby core. Think about how to get most of YJIT. The team identified that apply a technique called object shapes present in some other languages like Self and Smalltalk, and already implemented by Truthful Ruby, we could get some performance results in Ruby. Both Chris and Maxime talk about how object shapes could help Ruby in RubyKai 2021 if you want more details. We assembled the team to work on this with Gemma, Aaron, and Eileen, and then we got object shapes integrated in Ruby 3.2. Gemma spoke at RubyKai last year, about how this implementation came to be if you want to learn more about it. With all the investments to Ruby, we got many members of our team invited to be parts of Ruby core. Today, we have 7 members of that team. At this point, I think I fulfilled the promise I made to Matt. I gave him people. We are also funding high-profile academics to focus their work towards Ruby. One of the goals of this is to create a self-perpetuating loop where we have more people in universities researching and think about how to make Ruby better, that will cause more early career researchers to also think how to make Ruby better and research things in universities. We have researchers working in areas like benchmarks, garbage collector, dynamic language optimizations, using Ruby to do their research. While the new part of the team was busy improving Ruby VMs, don't think the original team stopped working. Ellen joined our team to, again, how can I explain this? To do whatever she wants, because she's Ellen Chitel. And during this period, the team was mostly focused on internal things, like improving how we run data migrations, how we better organize our monolith, how to write safer schema migrations, how to make it easier to hundreds of applications to upgrade Ruby and Rails versions. Our work that I hope one day we are going to be able to share with the community. But right now, it's not in that stage. Of course, we continue to work on Rails, improving implementations like the boot database support and accepting community contributions. And to highlight the recent work that happened in the Rails framework that was driven by our team, I'm going to talk about 2 new features that are coming for Rails 7.1. Sorry to disappoint you, but this is the only thing I'm going to talk about Rails 7.1. But don't worry, we are cooking a great release for you, and it's going to be out very soon. The first is a new trilogy adapter. This adapter was not written by Shopify, but by the fine folks at GitHub. Trilogy is a new MySQL client written from the scratch without depending on libMySQL. That's fast and reliable. Our team participation on the Trilogy adoption was to try to adopt Trilogy in our main application, proving it can work in another big application outside that GitHub, and adding Trilogy as one of the official adapters in the next release of Rails. Yesterday, Adriana presented how this migration was done. And it was a great talk, so if you missed it, definitely check out the video later. The second is composite primary keys. We are using composite primary keys in our application to improve performance in some queries on our big database. While these are very niche feature, we wanted to bring to the framework to allow other people to use, and also to allow future work. For example, to allow support to different databases like Vitess. Like in the Ruby core team, we have 4 members on the Rails core team, and a few more in the committers and issues teams. We continue to work daily in the framework, reviewing community contributions, polishing existing features, and developing new ones. But the Ruby ecosystem is not only made of improvements in the Ruby language and the Rails framework. Early in 2022, we decided to expand the mandate of our team, of the team responsible for typing, to be about developer experience. This happened because one of the main selling points for Sorbet is not really the safety it provides, but the productivity that you get when you have more information about your code. The team decided to invest more time in code editor integrations, which we believe are lacking in Ruby. At the same time, the company was standardizing in one single editor, so everyone would be using VS Code. So we decided to take the opportunity to create an open source language server for Ruby. We released the Ruby LSP Gen later last year, which we are continuously improving and finding new ways to bring more productivity to Rails developers by bringing useful information closer to where the developers work in the editor. Don't miss Aaron's keynote tomorrow. He's going to give more details about this topic. And while helping the team with the language server and in many other static analysis tools like syntax tree, another member of our team, Kevin Newton, pitched us with the idea of a new Ruby parser made as a library that could be shared by many languages and tools. This parser would be error tolerant to help developers understand what's wrong with the code and to help tools to provide the better information to developers, like all the syntax errors in a single file instead of just stopping to pass in the first error. Now we are working to integrate this new parser to all Ruby implementations and to tooling like syntax tree, sorbet, perhaps Rubocop in the future. Another project in the ecosystem we invest on is rubycentral.org. To make sure that Ruby Central have ways to support the team of volunteers that work at rubycentral.org, we are supporting them with $1 million over 4 years through the Ruby Shield partnership. But money is not the only contribution we can make. Driven by increased concern about supply chain attacks that were affecting many companies, we decided to invest in increasing the security of the package registry we use, RubyChance. Our first work was to enable multi-factor authentication in the most popular chains, decreasing this way the likelihood of account takeover. And just a few weeks ago, we announced security device support for RubyGen CLI, make it easier to chain authors to security release the libraries using the YubiKeys or Touch ID devices. Because of this work, we now have 2 members of our team working on RubyGens, helping to triage issues, security reports, and review contributions. You can find one of them here. Jenny is around, and she has a bunch of issues, perfect for first-time contributors, and she is looking for people to pair program with. Because one of the goals of our team is to build the new generation of Ruby developers. And we do that by investing in new talent. Most of the people in our team were either interns or recently graduated from university. Others came from different communities with different backgrounds and new ways to solve problems. Some did not have any experience working in compilers, parsers, framework, or libraries. We are able to build this team because we had a mix of subject matter experts willing to meet new people and new people passionate to be part of our community. And most of our successful projects come from people with different perspectives. We could have chosen to invest only in Turf Ruby or MJIT instead of building a new JIT. We could have chosen to not write another Ruby parser. We could have never tried sorbet. We could have stick with MySQL 2 adapter. To truly evolve as a community, we need to accept that sometimes your perspective is limited and new ways to solve problems will emerge. We need to embrace new ideas, invest in the ones that are most dear to you, and allow experimentation. One of the ways we use to get different perspective internally is by doing an open source sabbatical. People come from other parts of the company to work in our team, either in their own ideas or in some of the projects we already work, to share their experience as a user and to bring back to the team expertise in the tool they use to do their job. Externally, we often remind ourselves that we don't want to become the community. We don't want to bring our great talent that work with Ruby to our team and to our company. We instead want to strengthen and expand our partnership with companies to help them to build similar teams, support them and invest more in the community. Today we have partnership with GitHub and Stripe, and we meet often to share our plans, exchange ideas, to support our mutual goals. I hope we can expand this relationship to more companies. That way, we can continue to push the big tent. We don't believe the solutions we are providing to the communities are the only ones that should exist. We are big Rails users and believers, but it never stopped us to contribute to projects related to other frameworks, for example. We watch and cheer for their success. We take inspiration from them. I hope that our story and contributions inspire more companies and individuals to invest in solutions that are needed to them, that they share with more people the excitement with the ecosystem, that we continue to bring new people and new ideas. Only this way, I believe we can continue driving our community forward. After all, we all share the same love, the love for Ruby, the love for Rails, and want them to succeed. Thank you.